I will now invite Dr. Mbugua Wa Mungai to give us a reflection on what the last 10 or so years of contemporary literature mean to us in the here and now, and more, I think, importantly, to what we are celebrating, I think, in a few weeks, 50 years of Kenyan independence. Thank you.
I remember when I first took a copy of Kwani to my MA class, the students were horrified. They were scandalized. They asked me, now, what is this? I remember it was an MA class. We were looking at the subject of modernities and writing within those modernities. And I told them, well, I really don't know what it is. You grapple with it. At the end of the semester, you'll tell me what you found. I am happy to report that from that class, people became so engrossed with the Kwani, they are always looking for something in there to write a paper or a dissertation about. And so I thought, well, the people who invited me to speak today had given me the order to speak about the following grand subject: East Africa and Kenyan contemporary literature in the context of a 50-year-old Kenya. And I said, well, I could speak about that, but I don't think I want to do that. I said, I want to be a bit subversive here. Let's not pretend we came to celebrate what Kwani has enabled us to achieve, right? So let's not beat about the bush and cut to the chase. And I decided I'm going to talk about spaces of contemporary creative expression that have enabled us to do what we are doing today, to the extent that now Kwani has become the subject of MA and PhD dissertations. Doesn't that deserve a small round of applause? And in that sense, then, permit me to read something from the editorial that Billy wrote for the 04 edition of Kwani. It is pertinent to what I'm going to be sharing with you today. It begins, let me tell you, it never ceases to amaze me how incredible a storytelling space Kenya is. I continue to meet in bars, in matatus, churches, estate corners, and in other public spaces that individual who is always bound to introduce himself with the magic words that always hold me spellbound. Let me tell you. I'm sure those of you who speak Kikuyu know the word atiriri, no? Or in Kiswahili, ebu wacha nikwambie. Or in Hebrew, ani omer, I tell you, right? And so on and so forth. And so the editorial continues, and I become the recipient of another incredible narrative. This has been going on for a while, ever since I came of drinking age, and quickly learned that a version of the truth on most national or local matters, or at least an inkling, can be found in the stranger sitting next to me in the pub, that woman in the M3, that cab driver late at night. And though the facts matter, it is the inducement of a commonality, the feeling that I share enough with a stranger to care about a shared narrative, to believe the unbelievable, the improbable version. That is what makes me feel more Kenyan than anything else. It is those shared narratives and the will to believe that truly tell about the nature of the Kenyan condition. And yet, another thing that never ceases to amaze, these narratives never find their way into our official and formal public context. That point is very important. I'm going to be talking about narratives, forms of expression, and the stories we tell about ourselves and as a country, particularly in the context of Kenya at 50. And we are going to see what thoughts we might share, you and I. So it is not really a lecture I came to deliver here, but it is just reflections on contemporary Kenyan creative expression. Notice I removed the word literature and writing in the context of a 50-year-old Kenya. But to begin with, of course, it does help to say that one cannot ignore the spaces we tell about Kenya, the space we tell about ourselves as Kenyans. We cannot divorce those from the larger reality that we are part of a space called Eastern Africa, not just as a geographical space, but as both idea and expression of a commonality, the one that was alluded to in that editorial from the 04 edition of Kwani. We are thinking about language, we are thinking about cultures, we are thinking about histories, and other shared things. Most recently, political processes, such as the East African community. So I would also be interested to hear what stories we are telling about the East African community, particularly within the flop that happened in 1977 with the death of the then East African community. I'm interested in the present reflections about the genres and the ideological positions that we have taken within the stories that we tell about ourselves, and how, particularly how, we have sought to express those narratives. Taking a historical lens to think about this, there's something that happens in Kenyan writing in the 60s and the 70s that is worth commenting upon. This is the period of the pioneers. You all know that. The Ngugis, the Okots, and all those other people who wrote back then. But why I'm interested in these people is not necessarily because of what they wrote, but particularly because of how they held us captive to thinking about ourselves all these years. Because you see, and you are free, those of you who engage in academic work, ask any number of students to tell you about East African literature. They will tell you about Ngoge, Okot, and with some luck, Taban, right? They'll tell you about, what is her name, Ogot. They'll tell you about, if they have read that far, Rebecca Njao, Repose in the Pool, and so on and so forth. But you don't hear anything about Uganda. The last time I checked, Uganda was in East Africa, right? Perhaps if they go that far, they'll only tell you about Bukenya, and perhaps Okello Ochuli. Tanzania still remains a blank to most students of literature, right? And when we conceptualize our courses at the university, and you are free to look at any number of courses formulated in literature departments, you realize that Tanzania is grossly underrepresented. My point is simple. It seems to me that we learned and learned well strategies of exclusion from the very pioneers that we pay homage to today. And I do not mean to disparage them in any way. They did what they could within particular realities of the day. They wrote what they wrote. But then it behoves us, their successors, to think about our own ideas of belonging, our own ideas of identity, the narratives we tell, and to consciously pay attention to the exclusions that we put in place. This whole idea of exclusion and inclusion is important, particularly if you think about the ways in which we construct public stroke official discourses and private narratives about ourselves. So it is important for us to think through the strategies of exclusion that we have come to learn and to express within our literature, or whatever other creative forms of writing that we have. But then something very, very interesting happens in the 60s and the 70s, particularly the mid-70s. Not just in Kenya, not just in East Africa, but the larger Africa. People become deeply disillusioned about the post-colonial state. And for me, this is where the really exciting stuff begins to happen. You see, we had those narratives of nationalism that we got from the pioneers, but after the disillusionment of the early 70s and mid-70s, what is it that people began doing with writing? Or you could not continue as if nothing had gone wrong with the state as we knew it. You had to address yourself to the question of disillusionment. And what were people trying to do? Which then is to say, if you look back from the 60s, the 70s, up to around the early 80s, there is reason enough to agree with the Taban when he says earlier that there was little that was going on. But that is only so far as creative writing was concerned, because we had become so used to the ways of Ngugi, to the ways of Taban, to the ways of Okot. We did not do much else. Where this interests me is when new writers begin writing. What sort of narratives do they begin telling? These are the successors to the pioneering generation. And we see towards the 80s, especially in Kenya, the heavy hand of the state shaping the kind of writing that emerges. That has important implications for what we are doing today. The disillusionment with the Moi state is what led people to begin thinking very seriously about subversion as a mode or as a strategy of survival. It could be political subversion, it could be subversion at any other levels, but subversion it was. And I'm interested in this to the extent that it illuminates our understanding of creative expressions. My question then would be, yes, having moved from the fireside back in the day, you know, after colonialism came and sundered quite a number of those spaces of performance, after having moved away from the hopeful narratives of the pioneers, what did we see happening in Kenya after the dictatorship of the 80s? That set in? People did not just go quiet. They began devising creative strategies to enable them survive the heavy hand of the Moi state. This is when we begin seeing people take the street as a very serious space of creative performance. I don't know who was in Nairobi then, but I'm sure some of you remember a guy called Nyengese, right? At Kencom House on Nairobi Street, you know, people just looked around town and saw Nyengese and thought, what could this, you know, funny guy be doing? But those sorts of spaces, those street corner performances at Kencom House and on Uchumi Walk, we had all those other guys at Jivanji Gardens. Those were people that were doing something. These were people that were communicating creatively about their own visions of what this state could have been or should have been. But at any rate, they were using those spaces subversively to register their having been excluded from running, the normal running of the state. I'm interested in the bars in that period. Bars. Those of you who may recall the late Wahome Mutahi, of course, we remember Citrus. Citrus is what we came to associate him more with in the early 90s. But this thing began much earlier. And of course, if we go back to the days of Kameredo and Ngugi wa Thiong'o and Ngugi wa Merie and all those peasant actors, then we see where barroom theater performances were coming from. But my point is this. Ordinary spaces, citizens found a way of turning ordinary spaces into spaces of creative expression. I mean, you just heard Billy confess in his editorial that he began appreciating narrative when he was of age, when he became of age, to sit with men and have a beer and a conversation in a bar. So this tells me that bars mean, or have meant for a long time in East Africa, more than we assume they have meant. Remember George Anyona. One of the seminal moments of the liberation struggle to get rid of Moi was fomented at Mutugi's bar, right? In Dagoretti. So the bar can quite become, or has been, a space of deep, engaged intellectual reflection, deep political work. It has always been. And I know now there is an artist who is hosting an exhibition somewhere. I can't remember her name, but you must have seen about this in the papers. And she's recreating bar scenes from all over Kenyan bars. And you see those gumboots, the murals, and so on and so forth. If you want to look at the whole gamut of barroom experiences, you may do well to go into bars in all sorts of places in rural Kenya and to look at the paintings they have, the murals they have put up there. What narratives of themselves are these people telling with the aid of these bar people? So anthropologists will tell you that that is a rich field of self-expression. And I'm only suggesting, if we are to think very critically about creative expression in the space called Kenya and how it has evolved, we have to look as well at those popular spaces, not just literature classrooms. We have to step outside of that, look at bars, look at street corners, look at matatu, look at any number of things that have been happening. But also, in a way that relates to universities, you will realize, and I'm sure my colleagues might be unhappy about what I'm going to say, for some time, there was an appearance that literature departments had just given up on doing what they were supposed to be doing. I don't know how many people affiliated to universities still do creative writing. I know there is Mulwa, I know there was Mbugua, I know there is quite a few other people at the University of Nairobi, but back in the 80s, owing to the fear that the Moi state had instilled in everybody, this seems like a space that people gave up on practicing in for the sole purpose of self-survival. I can understand that. But then after Moi, that space needed to have been reclaimed. It needed to have been taken back. People needed to begin writing and writing good stories, perhaps to critique the Moi years or any other thing. Now, having realized that there was a paucity in the kind of work, creative work that needed to be coming out of universities, what were Kenyans supposed to do? They had to sit and innovate alternative spaces of creative expression, popular spaces. And this, to my mind, is where Kwani comes in. 10 years ago, right? 2003. I was not here when they first pulled out the first edition. I came back to see something called Quani, and I thought, well, this is a very brash title for a publication. But then, the more I read it, the more I fell in love with it. And the more I said, this is precisely what we needed to be happening. I mean, in the absence of spaces of creative expression, this was a good thing that was beginning to grow. And I am happy that over the last 10 years, we have seen more and more people want to become interested or become interested in the project that is Quani, and that in a way has been the staging pad for many, many of the writers that we speak about today. I do not know if Yvonne Owuor would be with us here were it not for Quani, would it? She was created by Quani, or through that space that was available there. And so, Binyavanga, thank you very much for, enabling us get at least one big gun out here through Quani. But more importantly, it is the many Yvonne Owuors. It is the many, there is this and I forget. What is the name of that guy who wrote the story about Mombasa? The one where there were pictures of big women. Yes, Onyango. It is the Odhiambos, the Onyangos, and so on and so forth. These are the people who tell us stories that we really find a lot of joy in reading, and that, in a sense, speak to a great number of people about the particular conditions of post-colonial realities in this country. Because I'm interested, first and foremost, in understanding the totality of experiences in this post-colonial state, and which is why I distrust official narratives of the state. I do not trust them one bit. They will edit history. They will edit it in ways that tell you Kenya, and here I'm quoting, what is the name of this guy? the one who is, he is one of yours. He's very unhappy about Kenya and his official history. I forget his name. Anyway, not Pasarero. The other guy who used to shave like this, a line here. He has a line here. The name eludes me, and he smokes a lot. All writers do. The point is, we edit history in ways that make it impossible for us to recognize Kenyan realities. If you ask me, will I be attending the Jubilee celebrations at Uhuru Park? Of course I won't. Reason being, the stories I'm going to hear there about Kenya, they are not the stories of the Kenya I know. I want to be told stories about a Kenya I see, a Kenya I experience, on matatu, at the butchers, at the pub, in church, for those of you who go to church. So stories like the miracle workers, the miracle merchants by Motahi, those would speak to me because I see people getting conned every day. But when you begin telling me about stories of heroes that I have never seen or whose narratives are falsified, then I would want to disagree very seriously with those narratives. I will say two things and then shut up, because I also want to listen to what Yvonne is going to tell us. Why I find a lot of value in Kwani and associated products that have come up over the last 10 years is because they have enabled the space of creative expression to be liberalized. They have freed us from the tyranny of having to look to particular models of writing. The first time I saw Sheng written down on paper was in Kwani. You remember that email that people were exchanging all over, and then you guys got it and you put it there? I had seen some versions of it on the internet, but I said, arresting this and putting it on paper for me to read in Sheng, this is a first. Because you see, we are talking about questions of identity at 50. There are many, many people in Kenya who are below 30. There are many people in this country who cannot speak anything other than a smattering of Kiswahili, but perfect Sheng. What are we saying? Should we not cater for those people? What should they read? And they are literate. They are not illiterate. They are literate. They need something to read. And I'm saying these constituencies all need to be brought on board. I don't care whether what they write is something I would agree with, but at least let them write it and give it to people who will want to read it. And they may agree with them, they may not agree with them, but let's have that creative expression documented, put down somewhere and shared. I'm thinking also that it is possible for us to think about Kwani and associated spaces of production not as competitors to or with university literature departments. That is a pointless engagement. I see a lot of possibilities for the work that comes out of those spaces complementing what we do at university departments, so that the hostility that we have tended to see one way or the other from either of these sides, that is totally unnecessary. It could be more productive. It could be made to be more useful. All these are popular spaces of expression. And we know by now, with the evidence from the last 10 years, that people are interested in listening to alternative voices. We at the universities do well on the bit about theory. We stand very well placed to tap into the productions that these people give us, whether Kwani, whether the people in bar rooms. You remember Mogithi, those of you who have been in Nairobi for the last 10, 15 years. Mogithi, right? I see now Mogithi is the subject of at least, I have seen 3 PhD dissertations on Mogithi. And what annoys me is that all those dissertations were written abroad, right? We could not write them in music departments here, or literature departments, or departments of anthropology. And all I'm saying is, we need a rethink of the way we in academia engage with practitioners in order for us to use data that is relevant and that speaks directly to some of the realities that we purport to teach or that we would want to teach. And I'm saying only then can we have a fuller understanding of what this post-colonial space is truly about. It is not just about universities, it is not just about Kwani, it is not just about the theater performers in bars and so on and so forth. It is about the totality of those productions that come to illuminate our understanding of the post-colonial state. So in conclusion, I would like to see much more synergy between ourselves in the university, between those of you out there practicing various forms of creative expression. Give us the material. Let us sit down and discuss this and theorize about it, and then, like Billy would say, go have a beer. Thank you very much.